My daughter leaned against the doorway, arms folded, her smile thin as glass. "You can stay, if you behave." The word behave echoed louder than the clock behind her. I stood there in my own kitchen, holding the tea I'd just poured, steam rising between us like a question neither of us wanted to answer. That night, I folded the deed into an envelope and whispered to the empty house, "Let's see who behaves when this is over." I'm 67, a retired librarian, widow of 39 years. I live in a townhouse I bought with the overtime checks my husband used to joke were printed in caffeine. For decades, I thought I'd built this home brick by brick with love. Now, apparently, I'm just allowed to stay in it, so long as I'm obedient. Her name is Hannah, my eldest. 38, smart, practical, the kind of woman who always looks like she's late for a meeting, even when she's standing still. When her father passed, she was 19 and already managing everyone's emotions but her own. I used to think that made her strong. Now I see it made her distant. After my fall last winter, 1 broken wrist, 3 hospital nights, she insisted I come stay with them. She made it sound like compassion. I see now it was control, gift-wrapped as concern. At first, it was easy to pretend it was temporary. I told myself the guest room would do for a few weeks. I even brought my favorite mug, the blue one with chipped edges that somehow still held warmth. But slowly, without my noticing, her handprints began covering everything. My framed photos were rearranged for space. My books were boxed for decluttering. And my independence was renamed safety management. The day she said behave, I realized I had become a guest in the house I had paid for. I wasn't dangerous or reckless. I was just inconvenient to her new rhythm, an older rhythm, slower, quieter, too real. She and her husband, Mark, run their home like a company. Everything has a system: who cooks, who cleans, who speaks first. Even laughter feels scheduled. I tried to fit into their schedule, but apparently I sighed too loudly, asked too many questions, and left tea bags in the sink. So when she said, "You can stay, if you behave," I heard what she didn't say. "You can stay, until I find a nicer way to get rid of you." I wish I could tell you I fought back. I didn't. I just nodded, swallowed the shame, and said, "Of course, dear. It's a strange thing, to raise a voice so strong it ends up silencing yours." That evening, I sat alone in the dim kitchen. The hum of the refrigerator felt louder than the words I wanted to say. I watched the steam from my tea drift upward until it vanished, and I wondered if that's what motherhood becomes, a slow, invisible evaporation. I looked around the kitchen and realized how much of me had already been edited out. No recipe cards in the drawer, no family photos on the fridge, not even my favorite chair by the window. It had been moved to the garage to make space. Even my scent, lavender and lemon balm, had been replaced by her sterile eucalyptus candles. The house looked tidy, beautiful even, but it felt like a stage set for someone else's life. Later that night, as I was getting ready for bed, I heard her whispering to Mark in the hallway. "She's adjusting fine," Hannah said. "We just need to keep an eye on her finances. She gets forgetful." Forgetful. The word hit harder than behave. It wasn't true, but it was convenient, a label that excused everything she planned to take. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, realizing what my mother must have felt when I told her she was slowing down. I thought I was being kind back then. Now I understand. Kindness can sound like a leash. The next morning, Hannah placed a pile of letters on the counter. "Bills," she said briskly. "I've handled them all." I wanted to ask with what money, but I bit my tongue. She had already accused me of being overly sensitive, so I behaved. I smiled at breakfast, complimented her new curtains, laughed at jokes that weren't funny. And while I was stirring sugar into my tea, I made a quiet promise to myself. If she wanted me to behave, I would, just not in the way she expected. That night, I took out an old envelope, the one with the house deed. I ran my fingers over the embossed title. "Owner, Margaret E. Turner. My name, my home, my life. I slipped it into a drawer and whispered, "Let's see who behaves when this is over." The next morning, the city outside my window looked the same. Buses groaning, children running, sunlight falling between buildings like forgiveness. But something inside me had changed. I moved slower that day. Not because of age, because every movement felt observed. Hannah watched me from her laptop as if I were a pet she wasn't sure she wanted to keep. "Mum, don't strain yourself," she said when I reached for a mug. "You know your wrist isn't the same." I smiled. "It healed months ago." She didn't answer, just nodded, the way nurses nod at confused patients. I used to be the nurse in my own way. Not by profession, but by nature, always tending, soothing, patching things no one noticed were breaking. After my husband David died, I learned to fill silence with work. The school library became my refuge, quiet, predictable, lined with stories where people still learned lessons. I catalogued other people's happy endings while mine collected dust at home. 2 daughters. One promise, that they would never feel small, the way I often did. So I worked, nights, weekends, every spare minute. When their shoes were too tight, I went without new ones. When the mortgage bled me dry, I took tutoring jobs and smiled through exhaustion. I told myself it was worth it, that one day they'd look back and understand. Hannah did, for a while. She was the studious one, top of her class. She used to sit beside me late at night, highlighting textbooks while I balanced checkbooks. She'd say, "You're my hero, Mum." I'd smile and reply, then learn from my mistakes. She laughed back then. I didn't realize she would. My younger one, Lucy, was softer. She'd draw pictures of us, me, her, and her father, holding hands in crayon skies. She grew up to be an art teacher. She has her father's heart, steady and kind, and his habit of apologizing for things that aren't his fault. They used to call me the glue. Now I realize glue doesn't hold forever. It just hides the cracks until pressure makes them show. After David's funeral, people told me I was strong, but strength is overrated when no one offers softness. I learned how to fix leaky faucets, change tires, sign insurance papers, and never cry in public. Maybe that's why Hannah learned efficiency instead of empathy. I can't blame her entirely. She grew up watching me hold everything together with tired hands. She mistook silence for grace. She learned that control keeps the world from falling apart. And now, she uses it on me. There's a cruel symmetry in that. That evening, I sat by the window with my tea, 1 spoon of sugar, same as always. The streetlights flickered on one by one, and the city hummed its low, constant lullaby. It used to comfort me. Now it just reminded me of how small I'd become. I thought of my own mother, Evelyn, a woman of quiet suffering. She lived her last years in a chair by the window, asking permission to turn up the heat because my brother said electricity costs were high. I remember snapping at her once. "Mum, just ask him nicely." She did. He ignored her. I hated him for it, but I hated myself more for calling her weak. Now here I am, her reflection, only in a better house with better manners around my captivity. Hannah doesn't yell. She doesn't slam doors. Her cruelty is polite, the kind that smiles while taking your autonomy. Last night, she offered to help organize my finances again. She said it softly, almost sweetly. "You don't need to stress yourself, Mum. Just give me your login details. I'll take care of it." I told her I already had. She smiled that careful, approving smile people give toddlers who finally behave. I went to bed early after that, pretending exhaustion. But really, I was remembering every time I had let someone talk me out of my own instincts. Every moment when peace felt easier than confrontation. There's a special kind of loneliness in realizing your kindness was used as a strategy against you. It doesn't shout, it just settles in your bones, heavy and quiet. I stared at the ceiling that night and whispered into the dark. Maybe my mother behaved too. The thought chilled me. Because if she'd swallowed her pride and kept her peace, then maybe I'd inherited her obedience, not her wisdom. I turned over and looked toward the hallway where Hannah's laughter echoed faintly. It wasn't cruel laughter, just careless, and that somehow hurt more. She doesn't hate me. She just doesn't see me. And invisibility, I've learned, is the first stage of erasure. I closed my eyes and made another quiet promise. If silence is the only language she understands, then silence is what I'll use. Not submission strategy, because behaving is easy. It's being underestimated that takes patience. Morning light slanted through the blinds, striping the kitchen table like caution tape. Hannah was already there, laptop open, coffee steaming, her face lit by the cold glow of a spreadsheet. Beside her sat a small stack of envelopes, my name printed on all of them. "Morning," she said too brightly. I smiled back, still half asleep, still pretending everything was fine. "Mum, I've been looking over your bills," she began. "Some of these are late. You must have forgotten." She slid the top envelope toward me like a teacher handing back failed homework. I looked at it. Electric company. Due date last week. Paid online by her. I hadn't forgotten she'd changed the mailing address last month to make things easier. "I didn't forget," I said quietly. "You took over the account." Her brows lifted, all faux innocence. "You asked me to." "No," I said. "I agreed you could help." That word, help, hung between us like smoke. She sighed. "Mum, this isn't about control. It's about safety. You've always been bad with numbers." I almost laughed. I'd balanced a household budget on a teacher's salary for 40 years. I'd paid every bill, every mortgage, every grocery tab. Bad with numbers? No, I'd just stopped counting how many times I'd been patronized. I met her gaze and said, "I'm fine with numbers. I'm just not fine with strangers managing them for me." Her expression hardened just slightly, but enough to see the woman she'd become. Polished, impatient, certain. "Mum, I'm not a stranger," she said. "I'm your daughter." "Exactly," I replied. "That's why this feels worse." Her mouth opened, then closed. She exhaled through her nose the way people do when they want to sound composed. "You're overreacting." It wasn't anger. I felt it was clarity. Overreacting is what people say when you've finally started reacting at all. "Did you also sign for my property tax notice?" I asked. She blinked, surprised. "Yes, I mean, they sent it to our address. It's all under one account now." "Our?" "It's just paperwork, Mom." Her tone was patient, managerial, like I was a case file she was trying to close. I nodded slowly. "And who owns that account?" Silence. Then, "It's shared." Shared. Such a small word for theft. "Don't worry," she added quickly. "It's all legal. We're just making sure things transition smoothly." I smiled. The kind of smile that hurts more than it helps. Transition? Am I dying and no one told me? That startled her. Her fingers froze mid-typing. "Mum, that's not funny." "No," I said softly. "It isn't." The room fell quiet, except for the faint hum of her laptop fan. Behind her, the sunlight had shifted. Now it painted half her face gold and left the other half in shadow. Fitting. She stood, closing the laptop with deliberate calm. "You're being paranoid," she said. "We're just trying to help." There it was again. Help, the word people use when they're already holding the knife. Mark walked in just then, half-dressed, coffee mug in hand. "Everything okay?" "Fine," she said quickly, smiling at him. "Mum's just confused about the bills." He gave me that polite grin, sons-in-law perfect kind, detached, rehearsed. "Don't worry, Margaret," he said. "You raised a good one. She's got everything under control." I looked at him and said, "Yes, I can see that." He didn't hear the weight in it. Or maybe he did, and pretended not to. Either way, he kissed Hannah's cheek, said something about work, and left. The door clicked shut, and silence settled like dust. Hannah turned back to me, tone softening the performance of compassion. "Mum, you know I love you. I'm just trying to make sure you're okay." I nodded. I know. You're just making sure I stay that way under supervision. She flinched slightly, then laughed a brittle sound. You always make things sound so dramatic. I didn't answer. I reached for my tea instead. The mug trembled just a little in my hand, not from fear, but restraint. I appreciate your help, I said finally. Truly. But let's make one thing clear. I'm not helpless. Her lips parted, searching for a response. Nothing came. The silence stretched, long enough for her to realize this wasn't the same woman she'd been managing for months. Then, softly, she said, Maybe you should rest more. I smiled. Maybe you should stop deciding when I should. That one landed. Her eyes darted away, her mask slipping for just a second. Then she gathered the envelopes, muttered something about errands, and walked out. When the door shut, I let out a long, shaky breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The confrontation hadn't been loud, but it had drawn the first real line invisible, sharp, undeniable. I sat there in the quiet kitchen, tracing the edge of my mug. She thought she'd silenced me, but really she'd just confirmed what I already knew, that love without respect is just well-mannered control. I opened my notebook, the one I'd started the night she said behave. At the top of the page, I wrote, Tuesday called me paranoid, signed property tax in her name. And underneath it, in smaller letters, keep pretending, it's working. The envelope arrived on a Wednesday, thin, white, official. The kind that looks harmless until you open it. It wasn't addressed to me. It was addressed to Hannah Turner at my address. At first, I assumed it was a mix-up. Then I noticed the return logo, my bank. I sliced it open with the kitchen knife, a small act of rebellion that felt almost sacred. Inside was a single page. Confirmation of joint ownership transfer property. ID hash 7483-1. Joint ownership. My house. Her name. My first thought wasn't rage, it was disbelief. So clean it felt sterile. I read it again, tracing the printed letters like they might rearrange themselves into mercy. At the bottom, my signature. Neat. Practiced. Forged. For a moment, I just stared. Then I sat down, because the floor suddenly looked safer than standing. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence, steady as a heartbeat that didn't belong to me. Outside, a siren wailed somewhere in the city, sharp, fading like someone else's alarm for my life. I checked the date. 2 weeks ago. The same afternoon she'd helped me with online forms. I'd been tired that day. She'd told me, just click approve, Mum. It's an address verification thing. And I had, because I wanted to believe her, because I wanted peace. The letter trembled in my hand, not from fear, but fury too contained to find air. It was so quiet in the kitchen that I could hear my pulse in my ears, steady, measured, counting backward through decades of trust. I called the bank. After 3 menu options and 1 polite hold song, a man finally answered. His voice was smooth, unconcerned. He said the paperwork had been completed digitally, verified by the client's phone number, not my number. Can you tell me what number that was? I asked. I'm sorry, ma'am, for security reasons. Exactly, I interrupted. Security. He hesitated. It ends in 21. Hannah's. I thanked him, hung up, and sat staring at the phone. I'd seen 1,000 betrayals in books, but nothing prepares you for the paperwork version, clean, notarized, and legal. I walked to the hallway mirror and caught my reflection. 67, tired eyes, cardigan buttoned wrong. The kind of woman no one expects to fight back. For the first time, I smiled at that reflection, because invisibility is the perfect camouflage. That evening, Hannah came home late. She smelled of office perfume and certainty. Mum, she said lightly, did the mail come? I held up the envelope. It did. She froze, just long enough to betray herself. Oh, that. It's just a document I needed for the mortgage audit. Our mortgage? Well, technically, I cut in. It's mine. Her jaw tightened. Mum, please. You're making this harder than it has to be. I stepped closer, slowly, deliberately. I raised you to be clever, I said. I didn't raise you to be cruel. For a moment, something flickered in her eyes. Shame, maybe. Then it vanished behind that calm, managerial tone. It's complicated, she said. You wouldn't understand. We're just organizing things before it's too late. Too late for what? I asked. For you, she said softly. You're getting older, Mum. You forget things. There it was, the weapon polished to perfection. Forgetfulness, age, the slow erasure dressed as concern. I didn't respond. Silence is heavier than shouting, and it lasts longer. She mistook it for surrender. Don't worry, she added, brushing my shoulder as she passed. Everything we're doing is for your own good. The door to her room clicked shut. I sat at the table again, the forged signature between my fingers, the words, for your own good, looping through my head. That phrase has built prisons for women like me for centuries, padded with good intentions, locked with love. I turned the letter over, grabbed a pen, and wrote across the back in steady ink. Keep this. It's proof. Then I slipped it into my notebook beside the others, my quiet archive of every insult, every manipulation, every lie. The next day, I visited my old neighbor, Mrs. Grant, a retired notary who used to witness half the neighborhood's signatures back when people still trusted ink. She made tea, listened, and said one thing: make copies of everything, and don't tell her you know. I walked home through the grey city dusk, clutching the copies in my bag. Each step felt sharper, more defined. This wasn't grief anymore. It was geometry lines and angles of control, mapped perfectly. When I reached my doorstep, I looked up at the windows glowing above me, her windows, and whispered to the night, "You stole my name, but not my memory." Inside, the air felt different, cooler, aware. I made tea, sat down at the table, and opened my notebook again. Under yesterday's entry, I wrote, Wednesday forged signature confirmed. Next step, remember everything. Then I underlined one sentence 3 times. They think I've forgotten. I didn't sleep that night. The city hummed beyond my window, cars sighing through rain, the distant rhythm of late-night lives. But inside, it was still. I sat at the kitchen table with a single lamp burning, the forged document spread open before me. It's strange how betrayal sharpens your vision. The details you use to overlook a missing envelope, a changed password, a smile that lasts a little too long, all start arranging themselves into a pattern. By dawn, the pattern was complete. They weren't helping. They were removing me piece by piece. But here's the thing about being underestimated. It gives you time to prepare while they're busy celebrating their cleverness. I brewed coffee strong enough to burn away hesitation. Then I reached for the small black notebook I'd started weeks ago, the one labeled Behaving. Under the last note, I wrote in careful script, Stage 2, Observation. That afternoon, while Hannah was at work, I made my first call to Lucy, my younger daughter. Her voice was warm, cautious. "Mum, you okay?" "I will be," I said. "I just need you to listen." At first, I didn't tell her everything, just enough to open the door. She went silent for a long time, then said softly, "She wouldn't. She couldn't." "She did," I replied. "But this isn't about anger, Lucy. It's about reclaiming what's mine quietly." Lucy exhaled hard. I could hear her pacing. "I know a lawyer, one of my friends from college, Cora. She handles elder financial cases. Do you want me to ask her to call you?" That was the first time in weeks I felt my lungs expand all the way. "Yes," I said. "Please." The call came 2 days later. Cora's voice was steady, clipped, the kind of tone you only get from seeing too many families devour each other politely. "I've read the documents your daughter sent me," she said after listening to my story. "This isn't unusual, but it's serious. They've transferred partial rights through digital authorization." "So it's legal?" I asked. "Not if you didn't consent knowingly. It's reversible, but we'll need precision, not emotion." "Precision." I liked that word. Start by securing everything you still own independently: accounts, pension, insurance, she said. Don't alert them. Move quietly. Think of this as surgery, not war. Surgery. Another word I liked. Clean, clinical, effective. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet again, the same quiet that used to suffocate me. Only this time, it felt like strategy. The next morning, I began what I called the silent reversal. Step 1. Retrieve all old documents. I opened the cedar chest in my closet, the one David built the summer before he died. Inside were birth certificates, savings bonds, the original property deed with my maiden name, Margaret Ellis Turner. Seeing that name again felt like shaking hands with the version of myself I'd buried under motherhood. Step 2. Protect my identity. I opened a new checking account under Margaret Ellis. No Turner, no joint. The young banker asked, "Will this be your primary account, ma'am?" "It will," I said. "It always should have been." Step 3. Redirect the flow. I called the pension office, updated my address to Cora's law office, and requested all future correspondence sent there. The woman on the line asked gently, "Any particular reason for the change?" "Yes," I said. "Security." By the end of the week, my invisible architecture was built. No one knew but me, and that was the power of it. Hannah still called every evening to check in. "Everything all right, Mum? You sound tired." "I'm fine, sweetheart," I said, smiling into the receiver. "Just catching up on old hobbies." She laughed. "Good. Keep yourself busy." "Oh, I am," I whispered when the call ended. Every polite question she asked became a breadcrumb in my strategy. She thought I was fading. I was recording. She thought I was grateful. I was documenting. A week later, Lucy came to visit. She arrived without warning, her hair damp from the rain, eyes bright with a kind of protective fire. She hugged me tightly, too tightly. "I read the papers," she said. "I can't believe she did this." "She believes she's saving me," I said. "That's what makes it so dangerous." Lucy looked around the house, the rearranged furniture, the cold colors, the smell of disinfectant. "It doesn't feel like you live here anymore," she said quietly. I smiled. "That's about to change." We sat at the kitchen table, just like old times, except this time I was the one explaining how things would go. I told her about the lawyer, the new account, the redirected mail. She listened carefully, then said, "You've thought this through. Motherhood trains you to think 5 moves ahead," I said. "You just forget to use it for yourself." Before she left, she slipped an envelope onto the table. "I talked to Cora. She's drafted something, a revocation of power of attorney. You just need to sign it." I opened it slowly. The document gleamed under the kitchen light like a quiet weapon. I picked up the pen, signed my full name, Margaret Ellis Turner, and felt something inside me settle. It wasn't anger anymore. It was clarity. Lucy hugged me again before leaving. "You sure you want to do this quietly?" she asked. "Yes," I said, "because noise alerts predators. Silence confuses them." That night, I made tea and wrote in my notebook again. Friday, all accounts secure. Power revoked. Lucy knows. Lawyer ready. Phase 3 begins soon. Then underneath it, I wrote in smaller letters, "They think I'm behaving. Let them." I closed the book, turned off the lamp, and for the first time in months, I slept without fear. Because by then, I wasn't surviving their control. I was designing their downfall. Justice doesn't need an audience. It only needs precision. 2 weeks after Lucy's visit, the first domino fell. I was in the garden, trimming the little rosebush by the stoop, when my phone began to ring. The caller ID flashed Hannah. I almost didn't answer, but sometimes silence makes the best stage for truth. "Mum," she said, her voice sharp, rehearsed. "Did you change the bank accounts?" I let a pause bloom between us, long enough for her certainty to waver. "Yes," I said simply. "I did." She exhaled hard. "You can't just move funds like that. The mortgage isn't your concern," I interrupted. It's been paid. What? Her voice cracked, a sound I hadn't heard since she was 16 and lost her first job. Who's been paying it? I have, I said. With my money. The same money you were managing for my convenience. There was silence. I could almost hear her brain rewiring around the fact that her control had vanished overnight. You've made a mistake, she said finally. You can't just reverse ownership like that. I smiled, though she couldn't see it. You're right, dear. I didn't. My lawyer did. Her composure faltered. You… lawyer? Yes. Cora. Lovely woman. Sharp as a needle. Mum, she said, softening her tone, switching tactics. You don't understand what this means. We were trying to protect you. You're making this harder for everyone. I let the quiet stretch, like a violin string ready to snap. Then gently. No, Hannah. I'm making it fair. By evening, she showed up at my doorstep. No knock, just the sound of her key in the lock, like muscle memory refusing to die. She walked in fast, face flushed, jaw tight. Mum, what did you do? I turned from the kitchen counter, tea in hand, calm as a saint. I cleaned my house, I said, financially. She slammed the letter down in front of me, the official notice from the bank. Everything's been moved, even the utilities. Do you have any idea how confusing this is? I imagine it's very confusing, I said. That's what happens when you lose control of something that was never yours. Mum, stop, she pleaded. Please. We were only… helping, I finished. Yes, I've heard. Mark stepped in behind her, trying to steady things. His voice was low, soothing, the kind used to calm clients before a lawsuit. Margaret, maybe we can sit and talk about this. We didn't mean any harm. Then you won't mind signing a release acknowledging that, I said, handing him a folded paper from the counter. He frowned, unfolding it. Legal language, short and brutal. Cora's work. Hannah snatched it from him, eyes scanning the page. This says we forfeit any financial claim to your property or estate. Yes, I said. Exactly that. Mum, this is insane. No, I said, voice steady. This is restoration. Her breath came faster now. You're doing this because Lucy filled your head with nonsense. You're letting her manipulate you. I tilted my head. Is that what you call it when someone tells the truth? She took a step closer, the mask finally cracking. You're going to regret this. You can't survive without us. I smiled, small and sharp. That's the difference between us, dear. I already did. By the end of that week, Cora filed the final transfer documents. The house deed now read, owner Margaret Ellis Turner, beneficiary Lucy Turner. No joint, no proxy, no signatures forged in the dark. When Hannah found out, she sent a single text. You've ruined everything. I typed back, no. I just returned it to who it belonged to. Then I blocked her number. The next morning, I walked through the house, really walked, not tiptoed around their ghosts. The kitchen felt warmer. The walls looked brighter. Not because they'd changed colour, but because the air inside them finally belonged to me again. I opened every window. Sunlight poured in like a benediction. Dust rose, glittering, like something finally breathing again. For the first time in years, the silence in this house wasn't heavy. It was mine. Later that day, I wrote in my notebook, Phase 3 complete. All assets secured. They've been notified. The noise will come soon. Stay still. And just under that, I added, revenge is loud. Justice is quiet. Then I closed it, made tea, and sat by the window. Down the street, a mother was walking her daughter to school. The little girl was laughing, skipping, tugging her mother's hand too hard. I watched them disappear around the corner and whispered to the empty room, hold her tight, but not too long. One day she'll think she knows better than you. Let her. Time teaches what lectures can't. That night, Lucy called. Did she find out? Yes, I said. She'll recover. Lucy hesitated. You sound calm. I am. I finally remembered who I am. After we hung up, I turned off the lights and stood by the window, watching the street lamps flicker on one by one. The house creaked softly, settling into its new quiet. And somewhere deep inside, I could feel it, the balance restored. Not revenge, not victory, just equilibrium. The week after the papers were finalized, the house grew so still, it felt like even the walls were holding their breath. No more arguments, no more footsteps that didn't belong. Just me, my tea, and the hum of the old refrigerator. People say freedom feels like flying. They're wrong. It feels like standing steady, alone, but unshaken. I didn't hear from Hannah for days. Then the letters started arriving. The first was handwritten, shaky lines that slanted across the page. Mum, I don't know where to start. I never meant to hurt you. I thought I was protecting you from bills, from scams, from yourself. I thought I was being responsible. I didn't see how cruel I'd become while calling it care. I'm sorry. The ink bled slightly near the end, tears, probably. But I noticed something missing. Not once did she ask how I was. Even her apology still centered her intentions. I folded the letter gently, placed it inside my notebook between the early pages labeled observation and execution. The record was complete. Not to hold a grudge, but to remember how blindness begins. A few days later, another envelope arrived, typed, formal, sterile. From Mark, Mrs. Turner. We regret the misunderstanding and the distress it caused. We acted in good faith to ensure your financial safety. We hope you reconsider the recent transfers for the sake of harmony. I didn't bother reading it twice. I tore it once down the middle, fed it to the flame, and watched the edges curl. Harmony built on control isn't harmony at all. It's quiet slavery. After that, the quiet finally felt clean. I started waking earlier, letting sunlight hit my face before I made tea. I moved through rooms that had once felt foreign, touching the back of a chair, the smooth edge of a counter, relearning my own space, like a woman meeting her reflection for the first time in years. Mrs. Grant from next door stopped by one afternoon with tomatoes from her garden. "You look different," she said. "I am," I told her. "Peace does that." She nodded knowingly, the kind of nod only women over 60 can give, the one that says, "I understand everything without you needing to explain." The mailman lingered a little longer at the gate these days, too. People had heard rumors that my daughter tried to take the house and lost, that lawyers got involved, that I'd won. They said it with pity wrapped in admiration, but I didn't need either. What I wanted, I already had back. My voice, my name, and a key that opened my own front door. Lucy came by on a soft Sunday afternoon. She didn't knock, just called out, "Mum?" Her voice filled the house like music. When she saw me at the kitchen table, she smiled. "You look lighter." "I am," I said. "Not happier, just freer." She nodded. "Freedom looks good on you." She handed me a small brown envelope. "From Hannah," she said quietly. She didn't want to mail it. Inside was a photograph, the three of us, taken 20 years ago in the garden. David was still alive, his arm around me. Hannah's hair was wild from the wind, Lucy's head tilted against my shoulder. On the back, in Hannah's handwriting, "You were always the strong one." I just never knew it meant this. I stared at it for a long time. My throat felt heavy but dry. Lucy reached across the table, covering my hand. "She'll come around," she said softly. "Maybe," I replied, "when she learns the difference between care and control." We sat in silence for a while, sunlight spreading slowly across the table like a benediction. Sometimes words just get in the way of peace. That night, I walked through the house room by room, not to check locks or bills or chores, just to feel. Every space told a story. The living room where I once sat quietly as they whispered decisions about my life. The kitchen where I first said, "If you behave." The study where I'd hidden the envelope that became their undoing. And finally, my bedroom, the one place that had always belonged to me, even when everything else felt borrowed. I opened the curtains wide. The city outside shimmered with lights and noise. It used to overwhelm me. Now it sounded like proof that life goes on. On the nightstand sat my notebook filled to the brim with evidence, pain, and finally, resolution. I opened to the first page. The line still stared back. You can stay, if you behave. I smiled, because I had. I'd behaved perfectly, just not in the way they expected. I took a pen and wrote one final entry, the last line I would ever add. Behaving never saved me, but silence used right can rewrite an ending. Then I closed the notebook, tied it with a red ribbon, and placed it inside the cedar box where I keep David's ring and our wedding photo. Not as a weapon, as a witness. The next morning, I opened every window. The breeze swept through the house, carrying the scent of rain and lavender from the yard. The curtains danced, the light spilled in golden sheets, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel the urge to lower my voice. Outside, a sparrow landed on the railing, small and restless. I watched it hop, tilt its head, and then fly off into the wide, open sky. I whispered after it, "Peace doesn't mean you stop fighting. It means you finally know what's worth the fight." Then I turned, poured the rest of my tea into the sink, and let the water run. Cool, endless, cleansing. And as the sound filled the kitchen, I realized something I wish my mother had known, something I hope my daughters never forget. Justice isn't about taking back what was stolen. It's about remembering who you were before you gave it away. I stood there a moment longer, hands steady on the counter, and let the truth settle into me like sunlight. I hadn't just kept my house. I'd reclaimed myself.